So the other day I put out a video talking about the pros and cons of Nintendo's new game keycard format for the Nintendo Switch 2. In a nutshell, they're better than buying a digital code in a box that you pick off of a store shelf, but ultimately less convenient overall than digital because it does still require the physical presence of the card before you can play the game. Which is admittedly a small hurdle, but the thing about small hurdles is they tend to shift behavior over time. And the more I started to think about it, the more I started to really be reminded of the whole Netflix versus Blockbuster battle back in the day. And at first, I thought that would be the whole picture until I started to take a closer look at Nintendo's new virtual game cards, which are available right now if you have a Nintendo Switch and have updated to the latest firmware. And after taking a closer look at everything, I became more convinced than ever that this is a very tactical move on Nintendo's part. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, is just how virtual game cards fit into this puzzle along with the game keycard system, and harmonizes in a way that is outrageously clever on Nintendo's part, but also more than a little bit concerning for those of us who value physical media. So let's talk about surface appeal a little bit. When it comes to game keycards, they're not really a physical option that have any data on them, rather they're a sort of pseudo-physical option that just provide a license key to let you download that game and start playing it. Now, when it comes to virtual game cards, they are effectively still just digital games, but with a fresh coat of paint and a key piece of new functionality that does make them slightly more appealing than the regular digital games that you'd be used to. And that's because you can lend these out to other people who are a member of your family group for your Nintendo Switch Online account. They can hold on to the game for up to 2 weeks, and you don't have access to it while they have that and it's loaded into their system. But to be fair, you can recall that at any time, or they can return it early if they choose. Basically, the whole thing mimics physical lending, but with some pros and cons depending on how you feel about lending your games out. And at a glance, that does sound pretty great. I mean, again, some lending is better than no lending, right? Especially for households that have multiple Switches. And separately, each one of these formats has their pros and cons, which really just seems kind of well suited to whatever players or publishers want. But when you put them together, they start to create this really strange middle ground where physical games start to feel decidedly less convenient, and digital games of this format start to feel a whole lot more convenient and ultimately more appealing. And when I started to think about what that means, having them both smashed together like this and widely available to the masses, that's when I really started to lean into the idea that this was very much a deliberate strategy rather than just Nintendo trying to be nice to everybody and provide more options for their players and publishers. And to that end, because I really wanted to take a closer look at the 3 different formats that Nintendo offers, again, that would be your conventional physical game where it's all on cart, a game key card where it is not on cart but really is just a license key to download a digital copy, and then finally virtual game cards, which again are digital games that can just be lent out, I thought I would go ahead and put together a basic table that tracked 6 different metrics about convenience to sort of see how these 3 formats would shake out. And the 6 metrics that I decided to look at between these 3 different formats was convenience to obtain, convenience to play, convenience to lend, trade and resale abilities, risk of damage or loss, and then finally long-term access guarantees. And when I started to look at it in this admittedly somewhat simplistic way, where red is bad, green is good, and yellow is somewhere in the middle, the first thing that jumped out at me was it clearly does not paint some objective clear winner, right? Because this is a very subjective thing, and depending on your tastes and what you value the most, you may very much prefer one of these formats to the other. But one thing that did stick out to me is that virtual game cards, even though they don't necessarily stack more green than physical games, and certainly not more than game key cards, they do have less red. And the only place where they really come out objectively red and worse than the other formats is the fact that you definitely won't be able to trade these or resell them in any way, the same way you could recoup some of that value from a game key card, potentially, if people are willing to take those and trade, or if people actually want to buy them, or physicals where obviously those are a lot easier to sell and trade. Also, I should point out when I made this table, when I say something's difficult to obtain, I don't necessarily mean that it's, a Herculean task to buy a physical game. It's not, but it is decidedly less convenient than just clicking on an icon in your interface, downloading your game, and jumping into the action. Or tying this whole thing together, my big takeaway from this little thought experiment was that game keycards really are just digital with extra steps. Virtual game cards are really just digital but with the added benefit of sharing, which will be hugely appealing to households that have multiple Switches and players. And by comparison, if you try to pit physical games against the combination of game key cards and virtual game cards, they start to feel even more clunky and deprecated from a convenience perspective. And if there's one thing that I believe about humanity at scale, or at least consumer habits, it's that convenience almost always wins out. And in this scenario, game keycards add more friction to the physical experience, meanwhile virtual game cards make the entire digital experience more convenient and accessible. And when the physical versus digital debate is positioned like this, it becomes less of a war and really just more of a shift in behavior, where Nintendo doesn't have to fight some battle against consumers about whether or not to keep physical games, rather they just have to reframe the game board and let us move the pieces ourselves. And that's not just pure empty speculation on my part either. Even in the comments section on that last video, there were a range of different opinions on this topic. Some of you pointed out that a game keycard is at least better than just a digital code in a box, which I definitely agree with. Others were firmly against game key cards entirely because of their predilection towards physical collecting, which as a physical collector myself, I definitely understand. And some of you were vehemently opposed to either game key cards or virtual game cards, citing concerns over things like licensing and ownership, which, if Scott Pilgrim or Deadpool taught us anything, those are entirely valid concerns. All of this is to say, it definitely seems like we're starting to witness a transition here, one where one format is quietly being nudged out, while another format, like virtual game cards, are being polished up just enough to be convenient to make it the next logical choice. And if this strategy is successful and really does catch on with players or indie devs or publishers or anybody else who has a key stake in the digital versus physical debate, then it's entirely possible we're not going to see some grand sweeping statement from one of the big three that physical media is dead or something like that. Rather, it'll just sort of quietly get ushered out of the equation altogether as consumers choose the option that has the least amount of friction. But hey, this is just one guy's opinion. Where do you land on this? Do you think that this is just Nintendo strategizing and naturally responding to the will of the marketplace? Or do you think it's a very calculated move for them to eventually just completely deprecate physical media in a very crafty way, or maybe it's just some combination of both? Personally, I'm not sure if it is just a natural response to shifts in consumer behavior, or if it really is just some big conspiracy to finally wipe out physical games altogether, but it is something I'll be keeping a close eye on as somebody who appreciates the convenience of digital gaming, obviously as a Steam Deck fan, but someone who also is a huge physical collector and really likes to have games that are in a complete state that I can retain ownership of without worrying about losing them to licensing or something like that. But yeah, again, those are just my thoughts on it. I would love to hear what your thoughts are in the comments below. As far as what's coming up on the channel, I will be doing more Switch 2 content, perhaps unsurprisingly, as we are just a few weeks out from launch for that system at this point. And to that end, I'm still looking forward to highlighting a variety of third-party accessories for the Switch 2. And I'm also working on a basic tips video for anybody who's thinking about trading in their Switch to get the Switch 2, or just selling it off, and some things to consider before you go ahead and take that leap. But that's it for this one. As always, thank you so much for your time and watching videos here on the channel. I really, really appreciate it. Have an amazing day, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.